Thank you very much. I think it is 5 o'clock, so we are starting now and we are going live now. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, all of you, wherever you're joining us. Thank you very much for joining us. This is the meeting titled Global Innovation Index 2021, Insights into Innovation in Egypt. My name is Nagla Rizk. I'm Professor of Economics and founding director of the Access to Knowledge for Development Center at the School of Business of the American University in Cairo. I'm delighted to have you all with us and to have such a distinguished group of panelists who are joining us today, and welcome to them and to the audience. Let me first say a word of thanks to my team at the A2K4D, but also thanks are due to the AUC School of Business, Portulans Institute, and the World International Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. Let me immediately get to introducing our panelists. I will introduce them by order of last name. We have 90 minutes panel, and I'll give you more information as we go. Our panelists today, we are supposed to be joined by Dr. Walid AbdelNasser, Director, Division for Arab Countries, Regional and National Development Sector, World Intellectual Property Organization. I'm sure he will joining us. He will be joining us shortly. I know he has to leave to another meeting before 6, but he has promised to be with us. We're also honored to have Professor Soumitra Dutta, Professor and former founding dean of the Cornell S.C. Johnson College of Business and President, Portulans Institute. I also have my colleague, Dr. Ayman Ismail, Abdul, Latif, Jameel, Endowed Chair of Entrepreneurship and Founding Director at AUC Venture Lab and AUC Innovation Hub at AUC School of Business. Our beloved Dean, Professor Sherif Kamel, Dean of the AUC School of Business. And last but not least, Dr. Ghada Labib, we're honored to have you as well, Deputy Minister for Institutional Development, Ministry of Communication and Information Technology in Egypt. Welcome to you all. Thank you very much for joining us today to discuss this timely topic. As you well know, as everybody knows, recently the Global Innovation Index 2021 has just been released. The report, the most recent report, full of insights, global insights. Today's focus is more about talking about Egypt, but we are fortunate to be joined by Dr. AbdelNasser, who I see is also joined us, and Professor Dutta, both of whom will tell us more about the GII with also focus on Egypt. The way we will do this, we are having live streaming on Facebook, and we also, please feel free to follow us, to post your questions on the chat box, or there's also an opportunity to post questions on Facebook. On Twitter, we have the hashtag GII Egypt. So I will ask my team members to just post it on the chat box on Twitter. And without further ado, I'm just going to hand it immediately to Professor Sherif Kamel, Dean of the School of Business, to give some opening remarks, and we will just follow. I have the order of speakers, and I will tell you more about our round of discussions. Towards the end, we're going to have a Q&A session, but please feel free to post your questions as we go, and I'll be happy to address them at the last part of the session. Dean Kamel, tfaddal. I will ask also, if you allow me, my speakers to keep it up to 5 minutes per answer or per talk, so in order to allow for several interventions, 2 rounds of discussions, and diverse points of view. Dean Kamel, tfaddal.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Rizk. Delighted to be here, and I want to save time, so I echo every single commendation and thanks that Professor Rizk actually alluded to, mentioning our partners and our distinguished panelists. Many of them are very close friends. We go back, I don't want to say how many years, but I tell you, we go back decades working together, especially in the area of information and communication technology. Let me just cut to the chase. The title of the panel today is Insights into Innovation in Egypt. I'll go quick because I want to be respectful to the 5 minutes. And I want to use another term for the few minutes I'm going to share some highlights: innovation for inclusive development. Let me just very quickly go through the evolution of the ICT sector over the past 45 years in Egypt. The acceleration that we're talking about the last couple of years is just an elevated acceleration. But the digital transformation has been taking place for probably 40 plus years. from the minute we started buying desktops at home. And then it was pushed another level with the mobility, and then with the web, and then with the social media, and then most recently with the bits and pieces of the fourth industrial revolution. We've been going through that acceleration. And whenever we spoke about disruption, we thought of that's technology that is disrupting the day in a positive sense. And then came 2019 with the pandemic. Call it COVID-19, call it pandemic, call it a stealth attack, call it an enemy, call it whatever you want to call it. But actually it's ICT who saved the day, or at least tried to save the day. So the disruptor became the platform to move forward. There are so many things that could be said here, but I want to focus on very briefly on Egypt, because the title is Insight into Innovation in Egypt. Egypt has been taking so many strides in that direction, especially since the mid-80s. I myself was fortunate to be part of that team that worked at the Cabinet of Egypt Information and Decision Support Center since in the mid-80s. But then with the Ministry of ICT since 1999, there has been a speed up in the acceleration, especially also in the last 2 years. My good colleague and friend, Dr. Labib, is going to dwell into the details of that. So I'm not going to talk about some of the details of the ICT evolution and development. But the one thing I would put on top, and it's extremely important to realize innovation for inclusive development, is investing in human capital. I would put that at the forefront way before technology. But then what comes right after that would be the support environment, the legal, regulatory, governance, and support environment. This is what can help create an ecosystem that can help realize inclusive development, which is part of the direction that the ministry, together with the government, is going in that at this point. I want to just dwell on a few points before I conclude. Digitalization is very different than the digital economy, and extremely different than automation. We're not talking about automation. We're not talking of only digitalization, but digitalization with, excuse me, with an impact. And that can only be realized through the ecosystem I just alluded to. Is this an opportune moment? Absolutely, yes. We have a large informal economy. And when I mean informal economy, we should include not just individual, but also the millions of the enterprises, obviously mainly SMEs, who are informal. If my memory serves me well, we're talking about 3.5 million SMEs. Probably half of those, 50% plus, are actually informal, let alone the informal citizens, which again, if my memory serves me well, if I have the updates, only 32% of the adult population bank their money. So that provides an immense opportunity for the likes of financial inclusion and so on and so forth. What would that lead to? It is not just including people in the informal economy, but it also hits on something that the government is very much looking for, which is red tape, inefficiencies, corruption, and the list is long. So all these headers are part of what is called the ICT Strategy 2030, which is aligned with the Vision Egypt 2030. The last one I want to mention is all this is good and all this is fine. Yet we need to keep an eye on not exacerbating the divide that is already there. So here comes the policy level, which is extremely important, so that the development is actually inclusive and not actually widening the divide. I see innovation in the likes of what we're seeing through the startups coming up, whether in health tech, whether in ed tech, whether in fintech, whether in logistics, whether in retailing. All these can actually close the divide and help actually create jobs, unlike the narrative that could actually push people and societies to lose jobs. Yet it's the policy that is the devil in the detail, so everybody not just gets a chance to have access to technology, but also elevate the level of adoption of technology. And these are two separate things that are extremely important. And I think I'm exactly 5 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dean Kamel, and many thanks for highlighting really key insights into inclusive innovation in Egypt. Thank you for mentioning especially human capital, technology, we will talk about that, informal economy. I'm glad my students are among the audience, so lots of resonating points, and no better segue to Professor Dutta's presentation. You mentioned the epidemic, you mentioned innovation, you mentioned challenges and opportunities, and indeed the epidemic is mentioned, is highlighted in the Global Innovation Index 2021. So if I may welcome Professor Dutta, thank you for joining us to offer his remarks, and I will ask you to please, in 5 minutes, we'll be very grateful and looking forward to your comments. Soumitra, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Nagla, for your kind invitation, for in fact organizing this session. And Dean Kamel, it's a good pleasure to in fact be here once again with you. You're a good friend and a colleague. I wanted to thank you and Dr. Nagla for also joining the academic network of the Global Innovation Index. We're very pleased to have AUC as a member of the academic network. I thought I'll just share with you briefly some of the context of why I think GII is important. I think then next we'll have Dr. Walid share a little bit about the GII and what some of the findings are from this year. But I started the GII in 2007, mainly because I was seeing that innovation was extremely important for economies in more ways than one. Clearly, innovation was important for creating economic value, but also innovation was important for creating social value, for giving hope to young people. And I come from India, I used to go to many emerging markets, and I used to see that for young people to help them achieve their dreams, the ability to create something, to innovate was very, very important. And I started realizing that a lot of the metrics of innovation that were being used back before 2007 were relatively traditional in the sense of number of publications, number of PhDs, number of patents, number of citations, and so on. And those are all very, very important. So don't get me wrong, they're very, very important. But there are lots of other aspects of innovation which are not really being captured fully, especially in emerging markets, like, for example, social inclusion. Dr. Sherif mentioned that very much in his comments. And we see that inclusivity is, for example, one of the important elements important today as we build innovation ecosystems. So what we did was I created the Global Innovation Index to help bring a more broad-based view of innovation, a broad-based view of innovation that looks at multiple aspects of the innovation ecosystem of the country. If you look at the GII model really looks at different elements: human capital, as Dean Kamel mentioned, infrastructure, regulation, the market system, looks at various outputs and so on. And all of these can be looked at as chains in a link, so links in a chain. So you have a chain, you have different links in the chain. And if even one or two links are weak, the entire chain is weak. So the strength of the innovation system in a country really depends on the ability of a country to work on all these different links. And that's what actually makes innovation challenging. You can have great human talent, as Egypt has, as India has, and so on. But if the infrastructure is poor or if the market environment is not right, then somehow the great human talent not able to leverage the innovation ecosystem in the country. So I think we collectively have a need to build on this innovation ecosystem collectively inside the country. We have to make it inclusive, as Dean Kamel said. I think really want to emphasize that as a very important point, because even if you look at successful clusters, let's say like in Boston or in Palo Alto in the US, what you see is that, yes, they have been very successful in creating lots of innovations, but they really haven't been inclusive. So even these clusters in Palo Alto and Boston, you need a certain degree, you need to be a certain community, they're not necessarily inclusive of gender, inclusive of different racial groups. And especially if you think of the local population in those markets, the people who live locally in Boston and Palo Alto have been essentially priced out of those markets because successful technology clusters are there. So we have to look at innovation, inclusivity as a very important part of the future, because innovation is critical for every nation. It's important for Egypt too. Egypt has a very long and proud history of innovation, clearly in history. We all know that. Egypt has a great potential also for doing great things in the future. And I look forward to the discussion on innovation in Egypt in the, in the coming next 90 minutes or so. And I hope to be able to both learn and also contribute to the discussion. But thank you so much for organizing this meeting. And I'm very pleased that we're having the discussion on innovation in Egypt. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Dutta, and thank you for mentioning. I was going to mention the GII Academic Network. Indeed, we are proud members of the network, and we're looking forward to plenty of insights and activities working in collaboration with the rest of the wonderful global partners. Thank you for including us. I will move on from Professor Dutta, great insights, to Dr. Walid AbdelNasser from the World Intellectual Property Organization. Again, thank you for joining us, Dr. Walid, and if you would kindly in 5 minutes provide us your insights on the topic, on today's topic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Nagla, for inviting me. It's a great pleasure and honor for me to be among these distinguished panelists today. I already learned a lot from what Dean Sherif Kamel and Professor Soumitra Dutta have mentioned, and of course, Professor Dutta has a long experience with the GII. First of all, I should say really I'm honored and pleased to be with you, but also I should apologize that I have unfortunately to leave the meeting at 17:50 because this meeting, it's very important one for me, but it coincides also with the annual assemblies meetings of WIPO, which is the busiest part of the year for regional divisions in WIPO. My name is Walid AbdelNasser. I'm director of the regional division for Arab countries in WIPO. Of course, we have also cooperated in the past with the School of Business and with your respectable center and with AUC. It gives me great pleasure to be here today. Actually, I would say that, I mean, first of all, that regarding Egypt in the GII 2021, one general remark just to because for some participants or some friends who are following this, maybe they would say what the improvement between 2020 and 2021, it's minor improvement or so, 2 places or 2 ranks. But actually, one should say here, one should clarify that even some countries could improve, you know, in the performance of some of the indicators included that form eventually the ranking in the GII. But still, these countries could stay in the same place or even could regress because other countries have simply progressed more or improved more on some indicators. Of course, as you all know, I mean, we're talking about more than 80 indicators that make up the ranking in the GII. The GII has acquired really an increasing importance over the past years. It became also referred to by major international institutions and organizations, whether within the UN system or outside the UN system. Even some of the private sector big corporations take the GII into account when making their decisions on investment and other decisions. So that's why it acquired really a lot of importance at the political level, and it attracted a lot of high-level, reaching sometimes to heads of states and prime ministers, priority to improve the ranking of the country in the GII. Talking about Egypt, there was an improvement definitely in 2021 related compared to 2020. 2020 there was a sort of maybe moving back a bit compared to the previous year, but 2021 made up that. And one sector which I fully agree with Dean Sherif Kamel, what he mentioned about is the ICT sector. ICT sector contributed a lot to the improvement for the Egypt ranking this year. Also, I should clarify that a lot of inputs that we count on in WIPO for the ranking in the GII, it comes from other international organizations. So some of them are related directly to WIPO, like of course related to patents and I mean the number of patents and the number of trademarks and so on. But others actually come from other organizations, whether Bretton Woods institutions, whether the UNESCO, whether ITU and other international organizations. The question of innovation related to Egypt here is, of course, we're talking about improvement in inputs and outputs. And I would seize the opportunity and not to take more of the 5 minutes that Professor Nagla had allocated to me. I would like to say that innovation in particular, WIPO has been playing an important role in cooperating with Egypt in the area of innovation. This took different forms and different ways. One has been the project and ongoing projects on technology transfer offices. This project started last year and it's ongoing with the Egyptian Academy for Scientific Research and Technology. and it aims at establishing in 12 institutions in Egypt, including some universities, but some are research institutions, establishing technology transfer offices. Others have been related to another project, another ongoing project with Egypt. It's called the IP Policy for Universities project. This is an ongoing project with 33 Egyptian universities, hope to conclude also by next year. And there it's the idea of helping the universities in Egypt to encourage innovation among their faculty, of course, first of all, among maybe researchers who are in research centers affiliated to these universities, but also even among students in these universities. So this is hopefully another project that would add a lot to the improving the innovation ecosystem in Egypt. In addition, we have been cooperating actually with Egypt, to the Ministry of Higher Education and Scientific Research for several years with an important international fair or innovation organized annually by Egypt. It's international, but maybe with more focus on Middle East countries, as well as some Asian countries. And this has been going on for 8 sessions prior to the restrictions associated with the COVID-19. This takes me also to another area that has been where WIPO has been really involved with Egypt in, and this is cooperation with think tanks in Egypt. So last year there was a conclusion of an MOU with ECES, the Egyptian Center for Economic Studies in Egypt, in order also to cooperate in the area of raising awareness about the importance of improving the innovation environment, and to see what elements could be conducive to innovation in Egypt, whether at the level of the universities and research institutes, or even going beyond to the level of high schools and other relevant institutions, that reaching out to women and youth. The idea of that is that we have a priority now in WIPO since the assumption of the new Director General, Mr. Darren Tang, in October last year, almost a year ago, that to focus on also the economic impact of innovation and IP, meaning that to build partnership with SMEs, with SMEs intermediaries, with innovation incubators, with startups, and with chambers of commerce and industries in countries, as well as particular two constituencies that we are targeting now to enhance innovation and to actually to raise awareness of the importance of IP for enhancing innovation for these categories. And I mean here youth and women. So these two areas are important targets for our cooperation now with Egypt and with other countries that are member states of WIPO. I think I'll stop here because I've gone already beyond my 5 minutes, but I really thank you very lot. Thank you very much, Professor Nagla. I thank Dean Sherif Kamel, and I thank Professor Soumitra, and I'm really looking forward also to learning a lot from the panelists that will talk after me. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Walid. I really appreciate it. You're a long, time friend of the center and of AUC, of course, and we are very proud of our partnership also with WIPO, working together, WIPO and with Portulans Institute as well. Thank you so much. Now, allow me, if the audience will allow me 5 minutes, I'm going to say a few words about the GII in general so that people can follow the discussion, and if perhaps 2 to 3 minutes, if you allow me to tell you about our work in relation to GII at the center, because I think this can also help, with the discussion if you have any questions in that regard. So very quickly, for those of you who do not know details of the index is composed of 7 pillars. So very generally, the index looks at institutions, and institutions looking at political environment, regulatory environment, business environment. Also, the index looks at the second pillar is human capital and research, looking at education, R&D. The third is infrastructure, indeed, on top of which is ICTs, but also general infrastructure and ecological sustainability. So institutions, human capital, infrastructure, market sophistication, and there is an assessment of credit, investment, trade, competition, and market scale. Then there is the fifth is business sophistication, knowledge workers, innovation linkages, knowledge absorption. The sixth pillar is knowledge and technology outputs, looking at knowledge creation, knowledge impact, and knowledge diffusion. And the seventh is creative output, looking at intangible assets, creative goods and services, online creativity. Very quickly, the performance, as Dr. Walid mentioned, has improved Egypt's performance from 2020 to 2021. The overall score is higher than last year. The components that improved significantly are infrastructure and market sophistication. There is also an improvement in institution, in human capital and research, and in creative outputs. That's a significant improvement in creative outputs. But the two pillars that have sort of not done so well, there's business sophistication, knowledge, and technology outputs. If you'll allow me in a couple of minutes, at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, one track that we're working on is actually innovation, and we work on sort of capturing innovation, studying innovation in Egypt and in the rest of Africa. We're part of the Open African Innovation Research Partnership, where our work, inspired by the GII indeed, we are researching grounds-up innovation and studying how some of the GII components are reflected on the ground in Africa as we work on broad interpretations of these components using a wider lens that captures local innovation activities, most of which is informal, but not only in the informal sector. We're also looking at the formal sector and looking at informal practices. Professor Dutta was spot on in mentioning the need for continuous assessment of innovation, and this is really, really important, and our work is inspired by the GII as we try to capture what we call granulated pixels of informal innovation activities so that we can depict nuances of the full innovation landscape. Our partners, we have plenty of research outputs in Ghana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Egypt, Nigeria, South Africa, and elsewhere. The second track, we're also working with partners with the Egypt's Academy of Scientific Research and Technology and other partner researchers in Egypt to understand the data ecosystem behind Egypt's GII. The purpose is to understand the data landscape, develop an accurate and updated data ecosystem that more accurately reflects the realities, the innovation realities in Egypt. And the purpose here is to help inform policy, innovation policy. And indeed, in our round of questions, I'm going to ask my panelists about how we can leverage the GII for informing innovation policy making in Egypt in that case. Again, inspired by the GII. So last but not least, we're also members of the GII academic network that Professor Dutta has mentioned within the School of Business at AUC. And we really look forward to collaborating with other members of the network to benefit from this wonderful resource and undertake comparative work, and with the purpose of informing innovation policies, but also promoting academic scholarship in this very important area of research. Without further ado, I'm now going to move to our rounds to ask the panelists. And our first round I will ask of discussion, I want to zoom in on Egypt in the GII report, and I will ask our speakers, what I would like to see is, we look at Egypt's position, and I have specific questions to our speakers within their area of specialization and interest. So of course, I'm going to ask Dr. Ghada Labib, our guest from the Ministry of Communication Information Technology. Egypt saw a marked improvement in ICT indicators, in access, use, and government online services, digital transformation. So my question to you, Dr. Ghada, is would you please elaborate on efforts in these areas, especially in the last 2 years with COVID-19, what policies were undertaken, but also if you can tell us the successes, the wonderful achievements, and also whether there have been challenges, so that this informs our next steps in the future. And if I would ask you to keep it to 5 minutes, please. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Professor Rizk. And let me start by thanking the organizers, the American University in Cairo, the School of Business, the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, the Global Academic Network. It's a real pleasure to be among you today to discuss some of the good progress Egypt has made, as well as the challenges we have been facing, and how to really leverage the Global Innovation Index in order to strengthen capabilities. Actually, a lot has been achieved so far in the infrastructure development pillar, in the process simplification pillar, and in the capacity building pillar, not only for the government officials, but also for all the segment of the society. Thus, to ensure the sustainability of all these efforts, His Excellency, the Minister, Dr. Amr Talat, the Minister of Communications and Information Technology, launched a DTU Academy, Digital Transformation Academy, in the 27th of May, 2021. This academy, leading the digital transformation units across the ministries at the central level and at the local level in the governorates. If I will start with the infrastructure pillar, I will start with mentioning some important numbers. The investments in the infrastructure increased by 35%, reaching around 3.5 billion Egyptian pounds. The average internet speed increased 4 times over the past 2 years, and during the pandemic, the ICT sector was the country's highest growing sector, contributing over 4% to the GDP, or to be exact, it's a 4.4%. Our efforts involve many mega projects running in parallel. The new administrative capital, which is offering us a real opportunity for Quantum Leap. The Decent Life Initiative project in 20 governorates, okay, working the first phase in 1,400 villages. Now we are connecting fiber to the home in the villages. This initiative, after 3 years, will affect 58 billion citizens, as well as the renovation of Egypt Post offices across the country. Right. MCIT also working to connect giant databases. Already 75 national databases have been linked together and integrated from different government sectors. We started with Port Said, our pilot first digital governorate, our pilot legacy system, migrating into a comprehensive digital government. I do want to mention the full healthcare or health insurance coverage fully implemented in Port Said, and will be fully implemented across Egypt to cover all Egyptian governorates by 2030. On the vertical level, we are working on mega projects, re-engineering priority sectors such as agriculture, health, law enforcement, urban planning, injecting technology to enhance efficiency and effectiveness. In terms of capacity building, we have started with digital awareness campaigns, followed by training programs aimed at achieving digital illiteracy according to Article 25 of the Constitution. This is conducted on all levels of for different population segments, such as housewives, farmers, graduates, undergraduates, skilled workers, unskilled workers, PWDs, people with disabilities, through some of our initiatives, such as Digital Egypt Builders Initiative, Future Work is Digital, Qudwa Tech for Women, and others, which I will not mention all due to time constraints. Cybersecurity is a key and is well managed via CERT, who is charged with providing computers and information security response support for all, and defense against cyber attacks and collaboration with governmental and the non-governmental entities as well, and financial entities and other critical information infrastructure sectors. It will also provide early warning against malware spreading and the massive cyber attacks against Egypt telecom infrastructure. Data protection law introduced on last July 2020 aims to regulate and protect citizen data online, our focus will continue to be on making sure that no one is left behind or no one is left offline in terms of connectivity, affordability, accessibility, as well as increasing the digital skills gap. Many initiatives and projects working on capacity building have been launched. This is a 360 degrees approach to national human capacities development. We are focusing also on the why and what behind the value proposition to citizens as we go through the digital transformation journey. We understand well that the digitalization itself is not an aim or a goal or a fashion to be followed. It's a way or a tool for achieve efficiency and effectiveness. And also, it's a tool to reach effectiveness and efficiency that will make citizens satisfied, and also a tool for proper management of the national resources, such as human resources, financial resources, natural resources, assets, you name it. Challenges remain in terms of digital technologies adoption by citizens. In the instance of government online services, e-participation and news, which are working on increasing and discovering underlying causes, whether through processes simplification, enhancing citizen trust in digital technologies. Trust is a key, and it's our main challenge actually. There is a big, we have an issue in the trust in digital technologies through proper training and information and spread awareness about digital inclusion and financial inclusion as well.
Thank you, Dr. Ghada. Thank you very much. Yes, I want to, I appreciate your comments very much, because I want to take this to the next step. I would like to ask my colleague, Dr. Ayman Ismail, and I want to pick talking about the challenge and, the human capital. I want to ask him about the pillar of business sophistication. Business sophistication is a pillar where Egypt has not done so well. So we picked one pillar that Egypt has improved. Business sophistication, it hasn't, and it's composed of three components. There's knowledge workers, knowledge absorption, where the performance has deteriorated, but innovation linkages, there was an obvious improvement. So these are the three components. So I would like to ask Dr. Ayman, who's an expert in innovation and entrepreneurship, can you please give us a perspective from the innovation ecosystem, from the ground, regarding this narrative? Egypt's entrepreneurial scene is buzzing. Why is there a decline in the score? What are the challenges? What has improved and what hasn't, and why, in your opinion? And what can drive improvement based in this context? Thank you, Dr. Ayman. Tfaddal.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagla, and it's a real pleasure to be with you all. And you've given me the tough question, which is whenever you see a decline in an index and you try to say, what is happening in that space? So let me take you through 3 points. The first thing is, when we look at innovation, the way it is defined in this report is a very broad definition that goes way beyond the traditional definition of looking at R&D and patents and all of that. So it looks broadly at the economy and how dynamic it is. Let's look at the structure of the Egyptian economy. And I think Dean Sherif Kamel alluded to that at the very beginning. We have a majority or a large part of the economy that's in the form of micro, small and medium enterprises. Many of them are informal. A lot of the innovations that happen there are basically things that happen on the ground that we never actually measure or look at in those indices. So is there innovation happening there? Yes, but it's usually around very narrow problem solving related to survival, related to making the companies continue and so on. So that does not help on that space. We get to the large corporates and when we go and look at the large corporations, look at the sectors where they are. And you'll find that a big part of the sectors relate to construction, infrastructure, and so on. And there is innovation that happened there, but a lot of what's happening in those sectors are about actually efficiency, utilization, deployment. So innovation does happen, but it comes a lot lower in the priority list. Then what are you really left with? Universities, that's a very important part. And we see a lot that happens on the research, but less that happens on the development, the D part of the R&D. So we generate knowledge. We do generate knowledge in many of the Egyptian universities, but how do you translate those knowledge into actually products that make it to the industry? Those are the linkages that we look at, even though we're a little bit higher in that index, but we're still way beyond in terms of creating the connection from the intellectual property that happened, intellectual production that happens inside universities and research centers and connecting them with the industries. We're starting to see some pockets of companies, some local, some international. I mean, there are several international companies that are creating R&D centers here in Egypt that are generating really strong outcome. And there's some local companies that have graduated from the stage of, let me just produce something, to I actually need to have a more interesting product and I need to invest in R&D so that I can compete, not just a matter of efficiency or cost, betting on labor cost, but actually moving up the value chain. So we're seeing something there, but still probably I would call it flat. So it's not as much the huge change. The area where we're seeing interesting part, and I think we're going to see a lot more we're going to see it showing up more in the future reports, is the area when you deal with startups. And the reason, and I'll take that to my second point, is basically, if you want to see where innovations are happening, follow the money. And the second thing, follow the policies. And let's dig into those two specific points. Where is the funding coming? There's very little R&D funding that's coming to universities. It has improved in the past few years. We're seeing some projects and funding programs coming in, but we don't have the equivalent of the NSF or the large foundations that provide serious, continuous, sustainable streams of funding where you can build that knowledge over time. Knowledge, you don't build it quickly. You spend a decade to become knowledgeable in an area until you're really able to produce stuff in it. There's a lot of funding on the other side going into tech startups that we're seeing it in the market. And I think many of them are going to focus on developing their products and competing regionally and globally. So I would expect this area to show a lot more. Just simply the investments have they're about 2.5x from last year to today. And I think next year, for example, this year, we're probably going to close the year close to $500 million investments in tech startups. Next year, probably that number is going to go up to $1 billion. That is a substantial amount. For those startups, I look at them and I start asking them, where do you create your innovations? Some of them are doing it locally because of access to talent, but some of them are also doing it in other locations for the exact same reason, also access to talent in some areas. So that's an important part. Move to the third part about the policies. You're going to see a lot of improvement in the area of digital transformation. Why? It's on the top of the government priority. Why? Again, it builds down to informality and tax collection. So there is a very strong belief at the top of the government that if we want to reduce corruption, reduce informality, and collect our taxes, we need to digitize. And I think we're at the beginning of, we're probably investment of 3-4 years in building the infrastructure. I think the next 2-3 years are going to be a huge wave of digitization and formalization of the economy. And I think you're going to see the structure of many of those numbers change. Some of them will go up, some will go down, but we're going to have access to data we did not see before, and we're going to see a lot of changes in that area before. So if you're asking me about the challenges, the development part and the R&D, that's a huge part. The talent is an opportunity and a challenge at the same time. And the third point is by moving out of informality and trying to through digitization, I think that's a huge opportunity that we're going to see. Thank you, Nagla.
Thank you very much, Ayman. These are great insights. And if you allow me, I'll just follow up on this with very quick comments on what Dr. Ayman has shared with us. Talent is very important. And you mentioned government funding. If we look at the pillar that looks at human capital and research, we find very interesting numbers. The numbers, there is a slight increase in the overall, which is the second pillar. The factors, the components of education that have increased, sadly, are the number of pupils. But if you look at government funding per secondary student has declined gravely. You know, the R&D funding, university rankings. So I think just looking at an initial coverage, looking at the numbers, at the very first reading of the numbers from the GII, this tells me that I need to do more research to understand why is it that quantity is increasing as far as the number of students, but we know very well that service industries, if you want to measure the improvement, it's about quality and not number of students. So immediately, just by looking at the indicator, I know that more research needs to be done to tell me that there is a message there for policy immediately. There is very decline in government funding, decline in R&D, decline in university rankings, but improvement in student enrollments. So how useful is that compared to declining quality? I take that to your comment, Dr. Ayman, about talents. I mean, we know that Egypt is a country with a huge young population. We only have to look at the population pyramid. And again, if we look at the seventh pillar, the creative outputs, where Egypt has done fantastic improvement, actually, you will find great improvements in intangible assets, in contributions to Wikipedia edits, to online creativity, creative goods and services. So this is, again, telling you this great, huge potential, great opportunity for investing in human capital in these areas. One last comment about linkages, again, referring to the work that we do in Africa. And you mentioned this also, Ayman, that sometimes there's innovation happening, and this is what we are working on in Africa, that needs to be captured. So for example, Ghana has a partnership actually between the government and an informal sector that actually leads to research with universities that feeds into innovative solutions for businesses, for example. So these kinds of partnerships will not be seen immediately. We really have to go and dig in and find them and understand to what extent they impact innovation. So thank you very much, Dr. Ayman, for these great insights. And I will then start the second round of questions to go back to Dr. Ghada and ask her, how do you see the future? I mean, how can we leverage the GII for, to support plans, future plans, especially given the pandemic? How do you see the future of ICT policy making in Egypt? What are the priorities, and how can we benefit from the GII report? And again, I will ask you to kindly keep it to 5 minutes so we're able to receive feedback from the rest of the panelists.
Okay, will be less. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a very good one. Under our ICT strategy 2030, new initiatives have been launched to maximize the contribution of the ICT sector Egypt's economic growth by focusing on growing specific sectors, fostering an environment for innovation and entrepreneurship. Harness emerging technologies such as AI in government decision-making process to create better public value, ensuring citizen safety online, enhancing the regulatory frameworks to match a new digital economy, and also which facilitates the innovative efforts. Most notable efforts toward the innovations are the development of the knowledge city in the new administrative capital, which aims to be not only a smart city, but an innovation hub. Egypt's first informatics university aimed in the new administrative capital as well, aims to provide a top-notch education and the scientific research in ICT. This is the first university in Egypt and in the Middle East, specialized in ICT. Capacity building programs and the consultancy. Also, 6 technology parks are under development in several governorates. Within the new administrative capital city, Creativa Innovation Lab will be established that will provide technical assistance to promote innovation and entrepreneurship. MCIT affiliates such as TEAC اللي هو Technology Innovation and Entrepreneurship Center support startups, innovators, and entrepreneurs to tackle challenges, capitalize on opportunities, and also gather funds. And having overall good consultation or it's a good expertise to support the startups to get their innovation to the market. And they are also doing considerable efforts via a program, Innove Egypt, program, which is an innovation and entrepreneurship program customized for university students and the graduates. The Innovation Cluster Initiative under ETIDA auspices aims to act as an enabler for innovation and entrepreneurship through public-private partnership. Another recent and a very good effort in implementation of the Applied Innovation Center meant to explore and to promote the use of emerging information and communications technology in analyzing and solving national challenges while developing human capital and creating an environment for innovative enterprises to form and succeed. The pandemic, as we said, accelerated the digital transformation to the public services. We have launched digital.gov.eg portal back in August last year, and currently we are offering approximately 90 services on this platform. We had fulfilled over 8 million requests and from over 3 million users. So the pandemic did accelerate the adoption of digital technology. Not only that, the perception and the priorities of the people, the citizens, have been changed. The common opinion is that the innovation is a key for anticipating and dealing with possible future scenarios. For the future, the focus is adopting emerging technology with a focus on leveraging AI for better governance, enhancing cybersecurity and citizen protection online, automation and industry 4.0, unifying and enhancing innovation efforts, capacity building for all the segments, as we said in round one, with digital skills which will be required in 9 out of 10 future jobs. Require digital skills. Increase the effectiveness and efficiency of the government employees, preparing the youth for future global workplace. In a nutshell, we are working on the whole national ecosystem by paving the way for digital transformation, making sure that all citizens have equal opportunities to compete in a digital economy, and make sure that the digital illiteracy, according to the Article 25 in the Constitution, is istihqaq dusturi for all the citizens, building average and the medium, but also niche skills required in the technology market to position the country as producer of technology, not only consumer of technology. And actually, the Global Innovation Index data provided helps in better decision-making, identifying area of improvement needed, area of weaknesses, and also recognize our progress and victories to date. Not only focus on our weaknesses, like celebrate the success and victories with us. This is the most important, to encourage us. Motivation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ghada. Thank you. I have one more question for Dr. Ayman, and then I will turn to Professor Dutta and Dean Kamel for their reflections. So let me ask you, Dr. Ayman, again, looking into the future, what do you see as the key innovation trends you expect for Egypt? What policy support does this require? For inclusive innovation, how can we leverage the GII and insights? And perhaps you want to say a few words about the future of work as well, given that I know this is an area that you and I are interested in, have worked on. Tfadal.
Thank you so much, Professor Nagla. Couple of things, just listening to a lot of what's happening, especially what Dr. Ghada was mentioning, we see a lot of change that's happening on the digitization agenda. And we're seeing a lot of impact in the market that's coming from those types of new applications, improving accessibility, reducing the cost, and creating opportunities. And I think this is great. But if you look at the space, you'll find that the majority of the action is happening in the ICT digital transformation, the ICT-enabled digital transformation. And the reason is we've reached a point where everybody's connected, and the cost of producing those applications is actually fairly low, and their ability to scale is very high. But you look at other sectors, manufacturing, agriculture, and retail, and you'll find that the innovation in those sectors is actually a lot lagging substantially behind the rest of the country and globally. Part of it is limited investment, part of it is a lot of informality and fragmentation in those sectors. So we need to think a lot about that. I know that now the government in the new plan, they're looking at 3 priorities: manufacturing, agriculture, and ICT. And I think ICT is a great catalyst for the rest, but I think we need to look at what's happening in those 2 sectors in terms of the policies, the enabling policies, the business environment, and so on, that would allow companies to grow and to invest in innovation and R&D. So that's one part. The second point, big trend that I'm seeing is there's a huge competition for talent. It's happening at the regional level, it's happening at the global level. Some of the top talent in Egypt is literally individually headhunted, whether from Europe or the GCC. Some of the top startups in Egypt are likewise also hunted very specifically. It's great to see talent having global opportunities, because eventually they will learn, become leaders all over the world, and come back and help in many ways. But we also want to make sure that we have opportunities for talent that are here in Egypt, that are actually attracting them, supporting them, retaining them, and giving them opportunities that are competitive globally. We're not competing in a small market, we're actually competing globally, especially in the war for talent. And that is really serious. To me, it's actually the most important thing that I look at as an indicator for innovation. In terms of the policy and the future of work, the future of work part is a little bit tricky, because I've seen tons of studies. We've seen both a lot of the studies talking about jobs that are disappearing and other jobs that are coming and all of that. I think part of them are true, but part of them might actually take a lot longer to actually get there than what people expect. The most important thing that this leads into is the educational side. And there are 2 dimensions on the education. One is that you need to actually invest a lot in getting people tech savvy in the very early educational spaces. So for example, the initiative to have every student having their own tablet and getting their content on that tablet and going through exams, it is gruesome. Everybody was terrified about them, but it's probably one of the best things that ever happened in the educational system in Egypt. Pushing content digital, pushing students to engage in different ways, it's really good. The second thing is you need to focus on other dimensions of learning, the soft skills, the leadership, the community, the things that cannot be automated, that cannot be kind of moved into AI, and that's another tough part. And the challenge is that the future person you need to produce is a mix of both. They need to be very, very technically savvy, but also very high on the EQ and the social skills and the leadership skills and community skills and all of that. So very tough for the educational space, and it's an area where we're starting to see trends and improvements and changes locally. So if you look at it, where are we heading in that space? I think if you again follow the money, in many countries the fund go into knowledge generation in universities, people invent R&D and patents, and then they start commercializing it. I think in our case, it's going to be the reverse. It's money coming to startups in the market that are creating the pull for those innovation and talent, and it's actually creating a pull model rather than a push model. Great opportunity. We need to think about how do we engage those startups with universities, with R&D. And this is something we're trying to do big time at AUC to attract the startups that are well funded to actually start engaging around innovation, not not just around the entrepreneurship side. And I think that will be a very important trend for universities in Egypt to engage in the future. Thank you, Nagla.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayman. May I ask Professor Dutta to provide reflections up to 5 minutes on, on the presentations, and then I will ask Dean Kamel to do the same. So may I ask Professor Dutta, go ahead.
No, thank you very much, Dr. Nagla, and it's been a pleasure and also very insightful to listen to the various presentations. And, I think I support all the comments that were made. Maybe just to complement them in some sense with some of my observations. I think what we are seeing right now is a very unique phase where we have seen a very rapid digital acceleration in terms of adoption of technology by many sectors. The real transformation is something which is only starting now in many sectors. So let's say, for example, how will the post-COVID work look like? How will the world of education look like in a post-COVID world? We don't really know it completely, but we have to discover it. A lot of uncertainty and experimentation have to be handled. So one requirement that I see very important right now is that all sectors have to invest very heavily in R&D. I think R&D investment levels are very low, in many emerging markets, including in Egypt. And I think we need to see more investment in R&D in companies simply because that's a very important source of generating ideas, of generating return on capital, of creating new kind of organizational and business models. So one suggestion that I have is if there can be a determined focus at finding policies or at adapting policies to support more investments in R&D in Egypt by Egyptian companies, that would be very good. And that's very important because if you look at what has happened since the last crisis, not the COVID crisis, but the last crisis in 2008, what is interesting is between the last crisis and the COVID crisis, a lot of the government investment in R&D declined. But in fact, total R&D investments in most countries increased because the corporate sector stepped in and increased the investments in R&D. So what happened was the corporate sector stepped in and filled the gap in R&D that was happening because of, let's say, the decline of the government expenditure. Now, what is likely going to happen even now is that the government's expenditure in R&D is going to not really increase dramatically, may stay stable if you're lucky, and may in fact decline in some cases. So to keep the R&D levels going up, you need to have more support from corporations. Corporations need to invest more in R&D. Now, companies also play a very important role in helping improve the quality of universities. And I say this because one of the frequent, let's say, insights we have from innovation in different countries is innovation is better the more effective the links are across the different actors in the innovation ecosystem. And two very important actors, of course, the government is a very important actor, but besides the government, two other important actors are academia and corporations. So the more we can actually do to increase the links between academia and corporations in R&D and innovation, I think it's good for everyone. But primarily, it's also very good for the universities themselves. Dean Kamel, he'd mentioned about how it's important to invest in human capital. And I take the example of some of the best universities in the world, let's say, for example, Stanford University. And in Stanford University, the beauty of what Stanford has done is the enormous wealth creation that has happened in the Bay Area from all these great technology innovators and innovative companies. Now, if you think about it, a lot of those companies, most of them were not created by Stanford University per se. They were created by graduates of Stanford University. Okay, the graduates who, of course, were attracted to the university in the first place, but who, more important, did good research with the professors at Stanford University. And the research was largely funded by corporations. So the corporate research funding research in the university helps improve the quality of education in the university, helps in fact prepare students who are better prepared to take these interesting ideas and commercialize them. And that is a very important source of wealth creation. So I think universities are a very important catalyst, and corporations can be a very important partner in the process of trying to trigger. So, I can talk about multiple aspects, but if I had to sort of focus on one of them, would be, let's look at how we can increase investments in R&D in Egypt. And the corporate sector in Egypt has a very important role to play out there, both by investing themselves in their own R&D, plus also helping investing R&D in the partner universities. So let me stop there and maybe look for other comments that I'm sure will come from other colleagues.
Thank you very much, Professor Dutta. Actually, I'm seeing the questions and I will engage everyone in the answers because I think there are a couple that I would love to hear your insights on in addition to the rest of our panelists. So if I may ask Dean Kamel to give us his reflections up to 5 minutes, 3 to 5 minutes, please go ahead.
Sure. I want to share a few points. Many of them are a reflection of what has been said, but let me look at them from a different angle. And very quickly, the first, ICT could both be an enabler, but also a push for maximizing efficiency if we look at it horizontally. But we should also never forget what Dr. Labib mentioned, which is ICT as a sector itself is contributing 4.4% to GDP. And the plan is for the next years, it can go up to 5%, but also even more than that. And it creates jobs. So it by itself is a pillar of the economy, but also is vertically, but also horizontally. It can, in my view, the very important point, breaking the silos. And this is why there is a pushback, because if you deploy those kind of technologies, you actually highlight the problems and people want to run away from the problems. So that I definitely wholeheartedly sympathize with the effort that is being done. The second, it's all about the quality, not the quantity. As simple as that. We talk to the youth, they're looking for jobs. You talk to the employers, they're looking for people. Where is the gap? It's the skill set. It's the skill set that needs to be transformed. Sorry to say, it's not about the degrees anymore. It's not about the certificate. It's about the skill set, the capacities, and how people can remain agile and competitive in today's very much changing marketplace. And on that point, and I'm relating to something that Dr. Ismail mentioned, which is vocational training. You look at the innovation, something we hardly are touching now, which is great. It's a step in the right direction. Sectors that are main for Egypt, like agriculture. How about precision agriculture? How about remote sensing? How can this actually impact the volume of production that is coming out of the agriculture sector? And if I take it up a notch, manufacturing, use of advanced digital production, ADPs, technologies. Someone would say we're very far from that, but actually only knocking on that door through vocational and technical training, that could be actually a good step in the right direction. And I want to mention also logistics and the global VCs, where we can actually have a role there if we have the capacities, if we have the infrastructure and the right policies. My next point is actually exports. And forgive me to speak on the from the economic side with my colleague Dr. Rizk on the call. I'm definitely not an economist, but unlike what many people think, Egypt does not have a problem in its imports. Egypt has a problem in its exports, which is way below par. But through innovation, how about digital exports? How digital services? And here comes the point that I think everybody mentioned, which is the massive youth, the digital natives that are sitting at home and working for companies in Saudi, in the UK, in Canada, across the United States. How is this captured? That's again an industry by itself where innovation can play a massive role. I want to finish by saying, yes, something that Professor Dutta alluded to in his final remark, and I keep saying that, and probably Dr. Ayman is going to smile that because he probably heard me saying it 1,000 times over the last 10 years. We do not need only a university incubator at AUC and Nile University and the Arab Academy. If we have 100 universities, we need to have 100 university-based incubators. Forgive me by saying that I believe more on the impact of university-based incubator versus standalone incubators, because they themselves create an ecosystem on campus. Research, not necessarily development, but research, access to resources, access to students, access to faculty, but also provides whatever that standalone incubators do. If we do that, and we have universities across the whole country, then you're creating a buzz, you're creating a culture, not just in Cairo. Cairo is not Egypt, not only in the big cities, but across the nation at large. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sherif. Great insights, and I'm seeing a flow of questions. So allow me to start this round of questions from the floor. And what I'll do is I'll just pose 3 questions. We've tried to group them by topic. I will pose 3 questions, and I will ask the speakers to take a go, you know, maybe like if you have the raise hand, just for me to see who would like to go first. Just one comment. I picked 3 questions that one way or another hint at or look at inclusion. Inclusive innovation is crucial. And again, I point to work that we're doing in Africa. For example, I know that Dr. Ayman alluded to this when he talked about linkages and work on the ground. Now you'll find, for example, in Africa, plenty of innovators, they will not seek a trademark, but they will do unofficial marks to mark their product. This is an informal way of protecting their intellectual property. These are innovators. So let's look at them and let's bring that out. You look at maker spaces and 3D printing, plenty of innovation is taking place there. And that's, I think, is important to highlight in our part of the region. So the 3 questions that look at inclusion from one or more angles, and I invite our panelists to answer, are as follows. One question talks about frugal innovation. As grassroots communities allow for inclusive development. Are there currently initiatives aiming towards exploring this further in Egypt? I think this is directed to Dr. Ghada, and if I'm not mistaken, is from Khalid Sayed. Please forgive if we, because I moved things around. So this is one, and other panelists are free to talk about that frugal innovation, and maybe Professor Dutta as well. I mean, please, Dr. Dutta and Dean Kamel, feel free to chip in your insights answering the question. So one question is about frugal innovation, grassroots community innovation. This is one thing which sort of relates to what I talked about earlier about maker spaces and informal activities on the ground. The second question talks about gender digital divide, and are there initiatives to address the gender digital divide in, which is important. I mean, it is there in Egypt and other parts of the world. And again, Professor Dutta, please feel free to give us your insights if you have examples from elsewhere. And then the third question in that context is about older citizens. I don't want to put an age limit, lest we should all fall in that, but excuse me. The question is, regarding the older citizens, they may not be users of the online world, might not own smartphones. So how do they fit into the digital literacy campaign? So question about older citizens, one about the gender digital divide, and about frugal innovation, grassroots communities. So I will check my, please let me know who would like to, address any of the questions from the speakers. The floor is yours. Dr. Ghada, would you like to give us your, Dr. Sherif, go ahead.
Dr. Sherif, and I am the last, okay.
Okay, go ahead, Dean Kamel.
I was gonna say, the gender digital divide. Let me look at it the other way around. How can innovation actually close that gap? And not just gender, the opportunities that could be enabled to the youth. And we've seen that happen. And by the way, it doesn't have to be completely sophisticated technologies, sometimes simple technologies. And we're seeing that gradually through the gig economy. Just using your cell phone, using mobile, being connected, that could actually formalize many of the actually millions of people who have probably multiple jobs every day. So could innovation with the right policies, simple innovation with the right policies, close that gender divide? Absolutely, yes. And there is no one size fits all, but there is no limitation to where they are in Egypt. There are no limitation to what they can do, and they can be reached all the time. And that's the power and reach that technology can actually offer, regardless the age, by the way. I'm not trying to go to question the third question, but again, on that point, it's flat. Let's go back to 2005 when Tom Friedman said the world is flat. Technology also is flat. It reaches everybody. The guy wrote Tom wrote that 16 years ago, but it's still valid until today. And we should look also on our economies and the opportunities that could be created through that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Kamel. Dr. Ghada, تفضل.
Okay, the first about the elderly people or the old people, how to reach the technology. Now in Egypt Post is a good way or a good, they have good outlets to reach all segments in the villages, in the cities, in the centers, and it's a good way to promote the online services. And also through the private sector, we have like المشاهلاتي. We give license to some private sector firms, the small companies, to provide, to help the citizen in order to get their services. مكاتب الخدمات الحكومية. Okay, so there are so many channels, and the citizen will choose which channel that suits him or her. Okay, through the portal, the online portal, through the office, through the mobile application, through the call center. Okay, and through the, like I said, the Egypt Post, or through the private sector. There are some lines, we MCIT gives license to some companies in private sector. The second question about?
There was one about gender, older people, and
okay, the
frugal
gender,
communities.
Actually, the initiative of Decent Life will help us to discover if the talented or the gifted citizen in different age bracket. And because we are interacting with all the segments, we have a partnership with the Ministry of Education, with the Ministry of Youth, with the Ministry of Culture, with the Ministry of Manpower, with actually the NGO, the Foundation of Decent Life Association or مؤسسة حياة كريمة. We work actually with all stakeholders in order to reach our mandates, the digital capacity building for all the segments. We can't, because the mandate it's big and it's large. But I can't reach that by myself, MCIT alone. We partnership with the NGOs, with the private sector, with different governmental institutions in order to fulfill our objectives and our mandates. I think the Life initiative will be a great opportunity to discover the talented people in the rural areas and in the governorates.
Thank you, Dr. Ghada. Dr. Ayman, go ahead.
Couple of quick points. One regarding the older or the age-related digital literacy. The biggest challenge is that up to maybe 3, 4, 5 decades, most people would see one cycle of major innovation in a lifetime, and in some cases, some people would live for centuries actually without seeing a major cycle of innovation. Right now, we're seeing probably 2, 3, 4 major cycles of innovation in a lifetime. So the challenge is going to be, actually is going to get worse and bigger, especially even for younger generation. I mean, I always tell my students, by the time you graduate, a lot of what I'm telling you is going to be obsolete. So it's not about telling you specific content because it's going to be obsolete in a couple of years. It's about thinking, how do you learn and relearn and reskilling and all of that. So in maybe our lifetime, people had to reskill maybe once in a lifetime, maybe when they're 40, 50, 60, and in technology change. The next generations, they're going to have to do that maybe every 10 years, where the whole support technology they're working with is going to change. So it's a very different story, and it's getting worse if worse is more change. Regarding the frugal innovation, a lot of people innovate. The challenge is, how do you actually monetize that innovation at scale in a way that shows in GDP numbers? So I can find a very, very smart way to solve a problem for my micro enterprise or for my life, but unless people, 1,000 people or 1 million people, either imitate it or I can take it and scale it, it doesn't show. So how do we actually link that innovation that happens to institutions, companies, or others that are able to take it to market at scale? That's the challenge. And that's why having entrepreneurs coupled with innovators, that's when you get interesting things happening. Companies coming out that are pushing those innovations into market, and you start seeing them in the job market, in the GDP numbers, in the Global Innovation Index report, and the like.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayman. Professor Dutta, I would love to hear your insights on this, and I have a question for you next, but please go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be very brief because many good things have already been said. I'll just make one comment about frugal innovation. You know, I come from India, and that's where I guess the term was also invented, and people, you know, use it a lot. And my comment always is that frugal innovation is good, but it's not enough. And let me explain what I mean by that. You know, in general, you have two types of innovations, some that are driven by the market and some that are driven by technology innovations. So when you have a need in the market, you can combine existing technologies in an effective, cheap, you know, less resource intensive manner. You can have a good example of a frugal innovation that meets the mass market needs. So that's very good, and it offers technology solution using existing technology at a price point that people can afford. But what is also important, I think this is important for countries with a good human potential like Egypt, like India, and so on. You need to also invest in technology-based innovations where you create new technologies, where you fundamentally open new avenues. This is what China is doing right now. You know, so basically, frugal is good, but frugal is not enough. And that's the point I want to make. The R&D investments in technology is important. You need to create innovative new technology yourself, and that can lead to interesting new avenues of, you know, innovation and new products and so on. And countries like Egypt should be also focusing on that.
Thank you so much. This is such an insightful point, because again, this is where this kind of information can inform policymaking, innovation policymaking, because once we know the frugal innovation exists, then the next step would be how can you take it further into market. So I think that again goes back to, you know, a wide lens that really looks at everything that's happening on the grounds up, and try to see how we can make the best use of it, or how innovation policies can actually push it a step further to reap its benefits and show up in the GII. Thank you, Professor Dutta. I actually have a question. So I just wanted to mention the first three questions were from Ahmed Fawzi, Hamza Hamed, and Khaled Al-Sayed. I know at least one or more is a student in my class, but also there's a question specifically about a comparative question about Egypt and India. Structurally and economically, Egypt and India tend to share many similarities. What are the key differentiators that are putting India above expectations versus Egypt in the GII report? Are there any lessons Egypt can leverage off? I know it's a big question, but just a few insights in that direction I think would be very useful for this conversation.
No, I think it's a very big question, and you're right in saying that there are similarities between Egypt and India, and certainly one can learn from the other. I think, you know, if I look at what has worked in India, really has been the creation of a few centers of excellence. That tradition over 30, 40 years, the creation of a few top universities, the government support of the universities, the creation of technology clusters in cities like Bangalore and so on successfully, and they were a little ahead of the time, let's put it this way. So I think that has been a big success story. But more recently, I think more recently, the last 10 years, what is very interesting in India is the government has taken a very important role in creating a unique digital infrastructure for the country. It has created a biometric database for the whole country, about 1.3 billion people on it, called Aadhaar. So it's a it's a national biometric database. It has created a stack of APIs around that called the India Stack. And I would really recommend anyone who's interested in learning something about it should just Google India stack, and you will see the whole explanation of that. But what has happened is, in India is creating a different model of digitalization innovation as compared to US and China. In US and China, you basically join one of the large companies, Amazon or Tencent or whatever, and you part of that sort of group, and you get services inside that walled garden. In India, because this base infrastructure is free, because the stack of APIs is free, any company can actually log on to that and can access the digitalization infrastructure. And it's really fundamentally unique. And I think it's a very good example of how, with the right kind of government leadership, you can actually have very good success in digitalization right now.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of questions that I'm going to read again to our panelists, mostly directed to universities and the community. So I guess one of them is directly to AUC. So how do we create a trickle-down effect of what is happening in institutions such as AUC regarding innovation to other segments of society that do not have access to these institutions or the same background of the people to occupy them? And a related question from Hannah Ishawahi tells us there is a critical mass of funding and talent matters in innovation, and specifically R&D. How does the plethora of private academic institutions in Egypt help or not in establishing hubs of innovation that are closely linked to industry? So it is about education, universities, hubs, industry. So if I may ask maybe Dr. Sherif and Dr. Ayman to give us their insights, and of course, Dr. Ghada and Professor Dutta are welcome to also provide their insights. Dean Kamel, would you like to take this one?
Sure, I'll just provide a sort of my 2 cents on this and maybe pass the floor to my colleague, Dr. Ismail. So we've been into this for now close to 12 years, trying to create a buzz across the market, create a community across the market. And we position ourselves as the school with all its subdivisions as the one of the educational partners of the ecosystem. Have we been opening our doors in many of our activities to the community at large? Absolutely, yes. We actually started by opening it to students and partners of the school, and then of the university, and then Egypt at large years ago. That takes different shapes and forms, whether competitions, boot camps, training, you name it. So it's definitely part and parcel of what we do, what we like to do, because as an institution, our impact by design, we are privileged to extend our impact to the community at large, and not just to the direct constituents of the school that are on campus. I don't know if Dr. Ayman would like to add to this.
Thank you, Dr. Sherif. Dr. Ayman?
Absolutely. Completely agree with what Dean Kamel mentioned. And let me give you an example. Right now, we're doing a program in collaboration with the Ministry of Planning and Economic Development to train all the managers for incubators, accelerators, entrepreneurship centers in all of Egypt. We've had the first round. When we announced it, we thought we're going to get 10 or 15, and I think we had more than 60 applicants. We did the first round. We had more than 30 participating. We're going to do another round starting in a couple of weeks with probably more than 50 participating, and we're very happy to share the knowledge. We learned a lot through mistakes and trials and errors and experimentation. That's what innovation is about at the end of the day. And we can save a lot of people time as they design their own programs, and they can actually leapfrog that experience and get into something effective in a year or two. So that's something we're doing, and we're very proud of doing. One thing that I just want to mention regarding building different centers and building on what Professor Dutta mentioned, it needs a lot of critical mass and long-term investments. So we have a lot of programs that push some money in some institutions for 2, 3 years, 4 years, especially development funds. But at the end of the day, in absence of continuous stream of funding over the long term, these things die. And I've seen too many wonderful initiatives where you build the capacity inside institutions, and then later on they fade because they don't have the consistent funding. The second thing is inclusion is good, but fragmentation and lack of economies of scale does not produce successful effects. So you'd rather build 1 or 2 centers of excellence and really go deep in them, that you have quality people and quality institutions, than fragmenting resources in 10 different organizations that will never have the critical mass to produce things. I know that it's tempting to be inclusive, but I'd rather be effective first so that you can create something that is of value. And I see many efforts happening in many countries that have this problem of fragmentation. And I think focusing, as India did in the IITs, you build one great model for an IIT, and then you can replicate it once you know how it works and once you have the support structure around it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ayman. We are approaching the end of our session. However, I would like to give 1 minute to every speaker if they would like to make one final comment. Please go ahead, and I just go in the order that I see on my screen. So maybe Dean Kamel, go ahead, please.
Sure, less than 1 minute. First, innovation needs an environment. It doesn't need the law. And I'm talking here in the context of Egypt. We always like to start thinking of a law. You create the environment, things happen. And the environment, of course, includes so many of the things we've discussed today: human capital, infrastructure, resources, and so on. It does not just need a law. The second, so if we create that environment, how should that environment be structured? In my mind, that environment should be enabled by the government. So it should be government enabled. Policies, regulations, support environment, and so on and so forth. But it has to be private sector led. That's what the private sector does, innovation. It has to be private sector led. Surely, with all my colleagues who've reached that conclusion today, it should be innovation driven, with investments, a flow of investment for R&D. So there has to be a part that is actually investing in innovation capital. And finally, with 60+% of our population youth, it has to be youth empowered. And that would come through the proliferation of startups that are taking place these days. And I still say we've grown the ecosystem with so many players over the last 10 years, but we're still scratching the surface. We're still scratching the surface when it comes to a mature, impactful entrepreneurial ecosystem. So to realize that, as just what Dr. Ayman just said, it needs scalability and sustainability so that the impact remains on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Professor Dutta, 1 minute, please.
Yes, I'll be very brief. So I've had the privilege of interacting with many innovators, young and not so young. And one thing is common amongst them is, if I look at what drives them to innovation, it is either inspiration or desperation. And I much rather bank on inspiration. I think let's look at how we can inspire young people, give them role models, give them examples so that they can be inspired to create interesting new things, innovate, and create a better world. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Dr. Ghada, tafadali.
Thank you very much for such insightful discussion. Actually, we have achieved a lot so far, and more is still on the pipeline. And we are going through a national rebirth of the country, as His Excellency the President said, الجمهورية الجديدة. So I am not agree with Dr. Sherif Kamel. No, we need regulation, proper regulation for the disruptive technology, for the AI globally, not only for Egypt, for the blockchain, for example. There is a lot to do in the part of the regulation. And I understand well that the ecosystem helps the country to be more innovative, the workforce, the startups, the government. Even Dubai introduced a new position in the government of Dubai called CIO. I stand for innovation, Chief Innovation Officer, not information officer. But the innovation is crucial and important, but we still need to work on the trust on adopting technology and the importance of proper regulation generally. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman.
Look, if you want to grow in innovation, there are three circles that you want to have. One is the institutional setup, the second is talent, the third one is capital. You have those three in one place, you're going to get a lot of innovation. The institutional setup, we've gone a long way in simplifying it for business and innovators in Egypt, but we're still way behind in terms of the changes that are about simplifying, not complicating. Talent, we do have the talent, it's being headhunted, and we need to really, really take care of our talent, be kind to them, respect them, compensate them for their efforts. Otherwise, they're going to find opportunities some other places. And capital flows in when you have the first two in place operating well. We started seeing companies, because capital coming into Egypt and startups, you're going to see a lot more, and it is disrupting traditional businesses and opening new opportunities. But we're seeing a lot of that that's going to come. If you want to produce a lot more innovation, fix the institutional structure that's supporting the business environment in Egypt, take care of the talent, investments will flow.
Thank you, Dr. Ayman. Allow me 2 minutes, if I may. First, let me thank the speakers in no particular order: Dr. Ghada, Dean Sherif Kamel, Professor Dutta, Dr. Walid, AbdelNasser, Dr. Ayman. I want to thank our audience for the excellent questions. I'm sorry I couldn't cover all of them. I want to thank my students who are in the audience. My thanks go to the School of Business at AUC, Portulans Institute, WIPO, World Intellectual Property Office, and the GII Network, which we are proud members of, and the Global Innovation Index that continues to inspire us. My special thanks to my team at the Access to Knowledge for Development Center, and to partners at the Open African Innovation Research Partnership, Open Air. And my final word is that we continue to, to look for innovation, find it, capture it, take a snapshot of it on the ground, tell a story, tell a narrative from the ground in the Global South, in Africa, and try to bring it to the fore and see how we can use, work with the GII to inform policy to take that forward for inclusive innovation. Thank you all so very much. We are 6 minutes beyond the time, but I think it was well worth it. I'm very grateful for everyone. Have a wonderful evening, day, afternoon, wherever you are. Many thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Shukran.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.